Keep talking then about what's happening in Syria a year on from the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Our senior reporter, James André, with me now. James, you were in Damascus just hours after the fall of the regime a year ago. Remarkable times. Just give us a sense, paint us a picture maybe of what it was like when you crossed that border, when you found yourself in a sort of free Syria.
Yeah, well, it was really remarkable because it's something we'd been, hoping for over a decade, that this war would come to an end. And indeed, what happened was, we have the pictures here. I actually filmed that day. I was with Julie Dungelhoff, and we just drove right into Syria, which was completely unthinkable. I mean, all these checkpoints were manned by the Syrian army, and all we had there was a bunch of rebels. And you can see this man who was actually in the car with us, because we took a sort of a minibus in, and there were former refugees with us, and they just stopped to kiss the floor, the soil of Syria, because they hadn't been in the country for over 10 years. They were hoping to find relatives, to see their country again. So, of course, it was very emotional. And then as we drove into Damascus itself, I mean, what we saw was, people destroying all the portraits of Bashar Assad, because there were pictures of him everywhere. We saw people also celebrating on, tanks that had been abandoned by the army. And then we eventually arrived into Damascus itself, where what was going was a massive celebration on Omeyades Square, which is in central Damascus, which is a place which we were told by locals is a place where they said, you couldn't even talk about, freedom or criticize Assad, but you wouldn't even think about it because just around that square, you had the national television, but also, the headquarters of local intelligence, headquarters of the police and army. So very much, the heart of the Assad regime there. And there we had, celebratory fire. I've never seen as many bullet casings on the floor as on that square that day, and people just telling us they were very happy. But of course, that was only the very, very beginning of what was to unfold in days later.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about what's sort of happened over the past year. But just if we stay with those initial hours and days, something you did witness was the cruelty of the regime in its notorious prisons.
Absolutely. What happened at that moment is that basically the prison doors across the country just burst open. And this was, for example, these pictures you can see behind me, that is what known as the Palestine branch. That was basically a large police security headquarters in central Damascus. And underneath it is a sprawling secret prison complex that basically was infamous in Damascus. People knew it existed because a lot of people were actually arrested and placed there, for days, weeks, months, years for some people. And indeed, with the repression, when the Syrian revolution started back in 2011, the regime started locking up a lot of people, way too many compared to what they could actually process. And so what happened was, of course, these cells became very, very full, and then people started disappearing. It was, a staple of the Assad regime's control was basically to, pluck people, for example, who'd be related to members of the opposition off the street. It could be their wife, their kids, their uncle, their aunt, and just throw them into prison. And then these people would potentially disappear. Now, what we witnessed as we entered, for example, this prison, which had just been emptied, a day before, you can still see all the rugs on the floor, etc., was that, for example, as they fled, the guards had destroyed all the evidence. We saw actually the archives room of that specific prison where it was completely burnt down. All the documents were burnt. And what we did see also was people desperately searching to find their loved ones who'd disappeared, some of them for 12, 13, 15 years. And so we saw these people walking around these pictures, going around the hospitals, because a lot of the inmates were taken to hospital given the state they were in as they were coming out. And these people were basically trying to find their relatives, desperately scrambling to find them. And one of the people who was with us in that minibus on that day was looking for his father when he came back into the country. So it's what I was telling you. Actually, my colleague Julie managed to get him on the phone, and he said that, he'd been trying very hard, hadn't managed. All he'd managed to find was evidence of the fact that his father had spent a few months in the notorious Sednaya prison in quite close to Damascus, but that was all he was managed to find. So he never found his father. All he found was a very small bit of the paper trail. And this, of course, is a massive political problem in the country. An estimated 110,000 people have disappeared in this carceral system, and today the families are searching, and of course the government, the current transitional government, is trying to give answers, and that is not easy.
And there are huge challenges, obviously, for this government now. One of them is simply trying to keep Syria together. Syria is a deeply divided country. We have Alawites on the coast, you have Kurds up in the north who want their own state, and you have the Druze minority in the south. Now, you were there in December when the regime fell. You went back a month later and you went to the south, to those Druze areas. Tell us about why you went there, what you saw.
Well, basically, we went to these Druze areas with my colleague Ashraf Abid because we were trying to understand how, one of the main goals for the new Bashar presidency was basically to try and unify all the militias and armed groups across Syria in order to create a national army and to stop the violence, because this, of course, is a very, very big issue. And what was happening basically in this area of Suweda the day we arrived was that, as you can see, all these vehicles and all these men are, for some, part of HTC, Hayat al-Sham, which is the organization that was headed by al-Shara and took power and was very much still, a very large militia at the time in Syria. And then the troop of what is called the Southern Command, which is another militia, which is basically, quite close ideologically to Ahmed al-Shara, but not completely. And these people, in the first place, wanted their independence. Well, this was a moment where they decided to go together into a southern province, which was controlled by a group of Bedouin armed men, to try and disarm them and to get them on board to join basically the national army. So this has been going on across the country. It has worked with the Southern Command, but it's much more complicated with the Druze, it's much more complicated with the Kurds up north. And so, of course, this is one of the big challenges that is still ongoing. For now, for example, there are still very, very strong tensions in the southern part of the country with the Druze, who are now backed by Israel, who wants to create a buffer zone in that area. So, this territorial and military control over the whole country has yet to be achieved, and it's very complicated.
And look, just finally, when we look ahead to the next year, what would you say are the immense challenges that face the Ahmed al-Shara government beyond, as you say, this sort of territorial issue that Syria has?
Well, obviously there are many, many things. I'd say maybe the biggest issue is the economy right now. 90% of Syrians live under the poverty line. An estimated 7 million Syrians are internally displaced. 6 million are refugees outside the country. So one of the things that is a massive problem is the money has lost all its value. So there's new money that's going to be created. But still, the economy is in tatters. And of course, there are the sanctions. Now, the sanctions are suspended for another 180 days after Ahmed al-Shara's visit to Washington. That was on the 10th of November. But still, they're not completely lifted. So you can't have heavy investment inside the country. The industry is completely stopped. You have power shortages, water shortages. It's terrible. And then I'd say the other big problem is national reconciliation. There's been violence on the coast with the Alawite community, violence in the south with the Druze. There is a lot of tension across the country. And right now, what is really required is transitional justice that needs to be credible, which it isn't at this stage. You need to reconciliate this whole country that has been at war for 14 years. And that, of course, is very, very difficult.
James André, thank you very much indeed.